Okay, let's get started. Just in the interest of time, the timer is running down here. How many of you have seen the movie Waterworld? There's a few people here. Okay, let me do some kind of census. How many physicians in the room? One. Two? 1.5? One? Two. Okay. Actually, I'm quite happy that there's at least two physicians in the room. Usually there are zero when I do a data science talk. So welcome. Thank you for if you're a medical professional, you will understand what I'm saying. We are what is called the postprandial somnolence phase of the sidereal day. What that means is you've eaten a lunch and your glucose levels are going crazy right now and you're extremely sleepy. So thank you for staying on, and we'll try and make this fun. That's my goal in life, is to share knowledge and make things fun. Okay, let's get started. So my perspective on this is all of you guys. You guys are, I'm actually looking at you guys looking forward. This is the view of the unicorns, if you will. And you are actually unicorns of the future. I also want to shout out to a couple of the guys in H2O. I'm only about 4 months old in H2O. I want to shout out to a couple of guys. I think you heard Arno Condell, Lee Wilkinson, who's our Chief Scientific Officer and probably one of the sharpest mathematical minds around. Tom Kraljevich, I don't know if Tom's here or not. Venkatesh Yadav, who actually faces customers. Wen Fan, Prithvi standing right there. And then a couple of guys who do IT. We have a magician in our IT group, Jeff Gambera, and then you heard Aaron Liddell. So these are the guys that actually behind the scenes guys. Some of them are speaking today, some are not. I think Wen is around here. Wen is also a customer guy. And a big shout out to Ian Gomez. Ian's done a great job at organizing all this stuff. So I have 20 minutes to give you a flavor of what's going on. The healthcare and the life sciences business is a $5 trillion business. And I have 20 minutes to explain to you all the use cases. I'll try my best. My first approach of this is a guy I met in the mid-90s. His name is John Sowa. How many of you have heard of John Sowa? Anybody? No? Okay. John Sowa is actually the creator of the conceptual graph for data systems. And if you're big Sherlock Holmes fans, you will actually see, well, it's not far enough, doesn't matter. You'll actually see the process of building use cases in the, as well. The process of building use cases for anything. And if you've seen Sherlock Holmes movies, how many of you are Sherlock Holmes people, fans? There's 5, 6, 8, 10. There's a very famous episode in of Holmes. It's called A Scandal in Bohemia, where he meets his match, and the match is actually a woman, gay woman. I'm not on the stage with Mariam Mirzakhani and Marie Curie, the first Nobel Prize and the first Fields Prize. I'm on the stage with a guy named Paul Erdos. Paul was called the oddball of oddballs, by the way. And Paul's goal in life was actually to conjecture and prove things. And I'll actually rewind that a little bit and say that there's another side of the fence. It's a guy who discovered the vitamin C pathway. This guy said life is nothing but an electron looking for a place to rest. If you think of that, when you start doing data science, you're actually trying to minimize errors. And I think Arno was talking about lossy data sets and so on. So coming back to Sherlock Holmes, you see the 4 things there: induction, deduction, abduction, and reality. And I think understanding what they are is important. Deduction is actually deriving a conclusion by reasoning. Remember that Sherlock Holmes does his mind palace or his mind map, and has the whole London map in his head. Induction is a generalized conclusion from the lesser part of the major hypothesis. Abduction is actually when the major premise is evident. I would say all of use case derivation in any data science project is actually abduction. And to kind of prove the point, I'll move a little bit into the clinical use cases. And the red X is the grand fail, by the way. The red X is actually where you fail at in a large instance in most life sciences and healthcare projects, is actually determining what you're doing with the use cases. You start with a hypothesis, just like the Sherlock Holmes slide. You go into the automation, training, and testing, which is what data science, you heard Aaron talk about automated machine learning. You apply some algorithms, and then you apply it to the real world with some sort of standardization and method definition, and then you come back and try and identify what the clinical needs are, which is why I asked the question, how many physicians in the room? Unless you have people who touch patients at the last foot, I think it becomes very hard to understand what is going on from a use case perspective. And my goal to try and do this in 20 minutes, actually 17 minutes, is to try and tell you what are the different use cases, which is what you probably came here for. All right? So let me jump into it. There's 4 pieces that I'm going to talk about in a very, very quick way. The first one is financial, then operational. And it doesn't matter if you're a healthcare organization or a life sciences organization. I probably won't talk about any machine learning or data science stuff, except for maybe the last slide in imaging. I'll try and do some comparisons there. All right? Here's the first one. Financial systems are actually moving into a very new world. And thanks to our new president, they're actually moving much faster than we think they are. And a lot of folks don't understand what Plan C is. So there are quite a few companies here, and I'll stand on a soapbox for 2 seconds and tell you what Accountable Care Act, or ACA, or Obamacare was. Actually, Obamacare was 4 things. The first thing was a subsidized health insurance program. And they actually operated in a network which was called health insurance exchanges, or HIEs. The second thing was individual mandates. So to run any insurance, how many insurance folks in the room? Quite a few. Three or four. So to run any insurance, you actually have to have an individual mandate. Everybody has to carry it. So you cannot drive a car, for example, without having insurance. That was kind of the example given. It's an easy case to do when you have a single payer, but if you have multiple payers, it actually becomes very complicated. The third thing was actually regulations around the individual market. And finally, you had Medicaid expansion. What do you do about the people who cannot afford to pay for health insurance? So that was my soapbox for a second. Most of these use cases were actually derived from the new Accountable Care Act. I'll go very quickly into the bottom left, which is market analysis and patient stratification and patient satisfaction. So patient satisfaction was not there in the meaningful use many years ago, but actually came on board about 5-6 years ago. And I think a lot of you are risk-based people. How many of you have a financial risk, understand risk models here? Quite a few, well, 5, 10. So I think from a claims perspective, this is the other big driver of financial use cases. You probably heard today or yesterday that United Health just announced its revenues, and United Health, any UHG people in the room? One, half? So it is a $200 billion organization. It's a very large organization. It's actually 3 times or 4 times larger than the largest life sciences pharma company in the United States. Just think about that. I mean, and as we go into the market driving new use cases and trying to incentivize people on new insurance markets, so physicians directly connecting to patients, that's a completely new insurance market. No middle guy. So by the way, UHG also announced a $250 million venture fund to understand where this new market's going to go using AI and ML and other things. So this is a very, very quick snapshot of what's going on. Just to tell you one use case that I was talking about, that's both an operational use case and a financial use case. There's a huge issue in physician burnout. There's not that many physicians in the United States. You have only 6 minutes if you're a physician to talk to your patient. You have only 4 seconds if you're a radiologist to study one image in a series of images in radiology. So these are the use cases we have to go forward with. Financial is probably the first use case. By the way, these are all in order. This is the first use case that any organization will look at, is financial. Only then they look at the next one, which is operational. And I wanted to say a few things about operational use cases. I'm going very fast because I have 20 minutes. Operational use cases, the first thing is medical errors. So medical errors actually is a third leading cause of death in the United States. Shri talked about cancer. Cancer above 80, if you're over 80 years old, cancer is still number one. I'll talk about the clinical use cases later. But medical errors, these are preventable things that happen in the healthcare system, kill about 30 to 50,000 people. We don't know how much because we don't measure it. It is an estimate at this point. The other thing I wanted to mention, I think I already mentioned that, was 55% of physicians experience burnout. What does burnout mean? They want to commit suicide, or they are depressed, or they're drug users themselves. How many people have heard this? Not many people hear about what goes on with physicians. Burnout is a very, very important thing. Drug-drug interactions. So in 2016, the profit of the top 10 drugs in the United States was $10 billion. The profit, the sales were 10 times more, $100 to $200 billion. The efficacy of these drugs, the top 10 selling drugs, were only between 12 and 18%. So we live in a market where we take drugs, prescription drugs, where the effective part of the outcomes are only 12 to 18%. What happens to the other 80%? We don't know. We don't study children. We don't study women in clinical trials. Clinical trials are actually in the extreme right of your slide. This is all statistical methods, by the way. I think Professor, who was the guy from Stanford? Anybody you name? I'm horrible at names. Say that again? Boyd, thank you. I was just testing if you're awake or not. So Dr. Boyd was talking about cluster randomized use cases, the convex use case. So cluster randomized is to take smaller data sets, combine them in statistical inferences, and actually present to the FDA as a larger clinical trial. The FDA accepts this as a clinical trial. So machine learning and statistics are already in use in some of these use cases. I want to do one more thing before I move on to my next slide, which is SODH, or social determinants of health. What causes chronic disease in the United States? The number one cause is loneliness. So when you get older and you're lonely, you actually have worse problems than when you're with your family. We've become nuclear, we've spread across. Maybe we have to come back again and have some family and friends and family, if you will. On the clinical side, what kills us? We don't really know why the United States bends the curve compared to other people, but at the age 50, I was talking to a very famous physician several years ago, and out of Boston, I won't tell you his name. He was telling me that Sanjay, the warranty period for human beings runs out when we turn 50. And here we are trying to build stem cells and live to 1,000 years old. But as an economy, we don't live healthy lives beyond 50. So let me leave you with that. By the way, the healthcare system is $3.2 trillion as of last year. It's actually going to go to $4.8 trillion in 2020. It's going to be 20% of the GDP. So anything that goes 20% over the GDP, you get into what's called the junk market. Japan actually faced that for other reasons for the last 10 years. The economy stagnates. There's other things that are important. So why are we sitting here thinking about healthcare? It is a $5 trillion market. I don't want to confuse it with this slide. Don't worry about the top part. Just look at the bottom part. The highest costs in the last 18 years, 20 years, were the top three things. Those are the three things that kill Americans and cost the government a lot of money. Hyperlipidemia. I'll try and define these. Hyperlipidemia is nothing but, you split the word apart, hyper and lipids. So it's a large amount of fatty molecules in your blood. There are many different forms of fatty molecules. Septicemia is infections. So you're getting septic infections in your blood. It can kill you within 48 to 72 hours in the healthcare system. That's a completely avoidable death statistic. Number 3 is pain. We actually don't understand what pain is. Pain may be an ML decision tree. We don't understand pain. Actually, there's probably some very good algorithms about pain. I'll talk about these. Diabetes actually causes hyperlipidemia. So pre-diabetics, 30% of the world is actually pre-diabetic. It's a very, very sobering statistic. So I'm actually fasting every other day nowadays to see if that actually changes my curve a little bit. I actually have very high HDL, so I'm not really in the diabetes column, but I want to understand what happens to the metabolic pathways with fasting. I'll go through each of these use cases very, very, very quickly. Hyperlipidemia is, in fact, if you ever looked at evolutionary biology, the universe was actually created with two things, RNAs and lipids. So there were self-assembling, self-correcting machines which had a fatty acid layer. Every cell from your biology class has a bilayer of fatty acids. So why are these short-chain fatty acids important? That's why I mentioned my fasting story. So there's a lot goes on that we really don't understand yet. There's a whole area called microbiomics, the gut microbiome. The number of cells that are not human cells in your body are actually 1.3 to 1.6 times than your own cells in your body. So you have other microbes, fungi, archaea, protists, and so on. But what I really want to get for you to take away today is to say the IoT and medical devices are actually very, very important. I have 20 seconds. I'll try and go very, very fast here. So measuring things in time series formation in IoT is actually critical. Because of time, I'll jump the other two. So on the top right, you have the 26 to 30 features in current medical tests. On the top left is actually septicemia. Septicemia is, again, we don't understand this disease well. Septicemia caused by many other things. So to combine retrospective data that you've collected in your healthcare systems and then prospectively look at microbiome and other IoT data, that becomes critical for septicemia use cases. So to me, it is machine learning plus time series information. Pain, we, again, don't understand it. We don't even record pain in ICD-9, ICD-10. Pain is actually coming in ICD-11, but ICD-11 is 2020 beyond. So we just measure it within the healthcare system. We have to actually measure it within a paid healthcare system. I think we'll probably start doing that very soon. So why is pain important? It is important because pain actually kills more people than road accidents. So opioid overdose, you've probably heard from the lay press that this is actually very, very important. I'm going over time here, but I'll try and compress this. So pain, in my view, is understanding what the features are. Can we actually build machine learning type neural networks that understand pain? There may be a mathematical model for pain, which is somewhere hidden in some other field, which is not in medicine yet. So pain to me is classification because pain is very complex as a disease. So labeling and classification of pain is actually critical. And here are the features for pain, all the top right. And then this is my one complicated slide, confuse the hell out of the audience slide on imaging. So imaging to me is three things: classification, which actually Arno talked about, anatomy recognition, which Dr. Boyd talked about, and organ segmentation, which we're not there yet. It uses some deep learning techniques, which we don't understand quite what happens inside the black box. So to me, machine learning, the fastest thing we can do in imaging is actually to classify images better. So you can see an example on the top left. 60 to 80% of them of the data is training, 10 to 20% is validation. But then if you listen to Arno, you actually don't need the test set at all. You can actually use H2O to train the data set very easily. We're actually working on some early imaging use cases. This is my last slide. So this is an infrastructure piece. So there's actually a capability maturity model for use cases. We're probably in level 3 right now. And just like the CMM, SEI CMM model, we need to be at level 8, which is automate everything, and is what you heard Sri today. With that, if you need my deck, I'm there on my email, so please email me the deck. I know I'm probably over time here, but I didn't have too much time to explain a $5 trillion market. Thank you very much.